The blizzard howled with demonic fury, obliterating everything in its path as Catherine Winters clutched her tattered shawl against the onslaught. The young schoolteacher stumbled forward, each step a battle against nature's wrath, her broken ankle screaming in agony. Just hours ago, the stagecoach had overturned on the mountain pass, the driver and other passengers pressing onward to find help while leaving her behind. A calculation of survival that left her alone to face certain death. Blood from her head wound, froze against her temple as her breath crystallized before her eyes. The promised schoolhouse in Silver Creek was only miles away, but it might as well have been on the moon as darkness began to claim the edges of her vision. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Catherine had come west with dreams of independence and purpose, fleeing the suffocating confines of Boston society. Her father's letter disowning her for refusing to marry the banker's son had burned in her pocket as she boarded the train west 3 weeks ago. Now that defiance seemed hollow as she collapsed into the snow, her strength finally giving way. The howling wind carried away her weakening cries for help. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. "I don't want to die alone." As consciousness began to slip away, Catherine thought she glimpsed a figure emerging from the whiteout, tall, broad-shouldered, leading a horse. But that was impossible. No one could be out in this tempest. Her mind was creating comforts. In her final moments, Jackson Cole had weathered 18 Montana winters, but none as vicious as this one. The seasoned rancher had been tracking strays when the storm hit without warning, forcing him to abandon his search and head for his cabin 5 miles north of Silver Creek. The blizzard seemed almost alive in its malevolence, and even his stallion, Midnight, the surest-footed horse in the territory, struggled against the drifts. "Easy, boy," he murmured, pulling his scarf tighter around his frost-nipped face. That's when he saw it. A splash of color against the endless white, a burgundy dress half buried in snow. For 3 years since returning from the war, Jackson had avoided people whenever possible. The horrors of Antietam had left scars deeper than the one that ran from his right eye to his jawline. He'd built his ranch miles from town, precisely to escape humanity's complications. But something deeper than his hard-earned cynicism, some remnant of the man he'd once been, wouldn't let him ride past. He dismounted, his boots sinking knee-deep in the snow as he trudged toward the figure. It was a woman, young from the looks of her refined hands, suggesting someone unaccustomed to frontier hardship. Blood had frozen in her auburn hair, and her skin held the blue-white pallor that preceded death. For a moment, he thought he was too late, then her eyelids fluttered. "Mom?" Jackson knelt beside her, checking for a pulse. It was there, weak but present. "Can you hear me?" No response. The woman was moments from freezing to death. Without a second thought, Jackson lifted her like she weighed nothing, years of breaking horses and hauling timber evident in the ease with which he carried her to Midnight. "We're taking on a passenger, boy," he told the horse, securing the unconscious woman before mounting behind her. He pulled her against his chest, trying to transfer what warmth he could through his buffalo hide coat. The cabin was still 3 miles away through the worst of the blizzard. 3 miles that might as well be 30 with visibility near zero and the temperature plummeting as night approached. But Jackson had survived worse. Shiloh, pneumonia last winter, the mountain lion attack that had claimed his right eye's vision. He'd make it because he had to, because for the first time in years, someone's life depended on him. "Hold on," he whispered, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "Just hold on." The snow whipped against them with increasing ferocity as Jackson guided Midnight forward. The stallion was their only hope, its instincts far more reliable than human senses in this white hell. The cold had begun to sink into Jackson's bones despite his layers, and he could only imagine how much worse it was for the woman in her thin dress. Just when the cabin should have come into view, Jackson realized with growing dread that nothing looked familiar. The landscape had been transformed by the storm, landmarks buried beneath feet of snow. They were lost. Midnight whinnied nervously, sensing his rider's uncertainty. Jackson fought down panic. Panic was death in conditions like these. He had to think. The creek ran east to west. His cabin sat on the north bank. If they could find the creek, a wolf howled in the distance, then another. The sound came from the south. Wolves would avoid the creek, too exposed. Jackson turned midnight north, praying his logic was sound, as the howls multiplied behind them. "They smell blood," he muttered. The woman moaned softly in response, the first sound she'd made. It struck Jackson as a good sign. The completely frozen didn't moan. The night was almost complete now, the blizzard showing no signs of abating. Jackson had begun to wonder if they would both freeze to death when midnight suddenly nickered with recognition. The horse knew where they were. "Take us home, boy," Jackson said, giving the stallion its head. 10 agonizing minutes later, the shadowy outline of the cabin materialized through the snow like a miracle. Jackson had never been so grateful to see the humble structure he'd built. With his own hands, he slid from the saddle, carefully bringing the woman down with him, and carried her to the door. Inside was dark and cold, the fire having died hours ago, but it was shelter from the wind. Jackson lay the woman on his bed, before setting about rekindling the fire. His fingers were nearly too numb to strike the match, but desperation lent him determination. As flames finally caught the kindling, Jackson turned his attention back to his unexpected guest. In the growing firelight, he could see her features, clearly for the first time. She was younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps 25, with delicate features that seemed at odds with the frontier. Her breathing was shallow, her skin ice-cold to the touch. "Got to get you warm," he said. As much to himself as to her, he knew the dangers of hypothermia, had seen good men die from it during the war. Warming too quickly could be as fatal as the cold itself. He set water to boil and cut away her frozen outer garments, replacing them with his own spare shirt before wrapping her in every blanket he owned. It was while removing her boots that he discovered her ankle, swollen, discolored, clearly broken. There was a gash on her temple too, crusted with frozen blood. "Who are you?" he wondered aloud. "And what in God's name were you doing out in this?" As if in response to his voice, the woman's eyes fluttered open, eyes the color of summer sage, disoriented and clouded with pain. She gasped, trying to push herself up before collapsing back with a whimper. "Easy," Jackson said, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "You're safe." "Where?" Her voice was barely audible, her throat too dry to form words. "My cabin," he answered, bringing a cup of melted snow to her lips. "Drink slowly." She obeyed, taking small sips before speaking again. "The stagecoach overturned. They said they'd send help." In this storm, that was a damn fool promise. The harshness in his tone seemed to frighten her, and Jackson immediately regretted it. "What's your name?" "Catherine," she whispered. "Catherine Winters, the new teacher for Silver Creek." Jackson nodded. The town had been expecting a school teacher from back east. "I'm Jackson Cole. My ranch is north of town. Thank you for—" The effort of speaking seemed too much. Her eyes drifted closed again as exhaustion claimed her. Jackson checked her pulse once more. Stronger now, but she wasn't out of danger. The broken ankle would need setting, the head wound cleaning. And if fever set in, as it often did after such exposure. Outside, the wolves howled closer, and the wind screamed against the cabin walls. The blizzard had trapped them together, this wounded schoolteacher and the reclusive rancher who'd sworn never to let another soul get close enough to matter. "Rest," he told the unconscious woman, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted her. To survive, survival meant complications, questions, gratitude he didn't deserve. The storm won't last forever. But as Jackson stoked the fire and settled into the chair beside the bed to keep watch through the night, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had already changed. For the first time since Antietam, he'd chosen to involve himself in another's fate. The wolves circled closer as the night deepened, but the predators that truly haunted Jackson weren't the four-legged kind. They were the memories that came in the stillness, memories of battlefields strewn with bodies, of brothers in arms he couldn't save, of a life before war had hollowed him out. Catherine Winters murmured something in her sleep, her brow furrowing, with pain or troubled dreams. Without thinking, Jackson reached out to brush a strand of auburn hair from her face. "You'll make it," he promised, surprising himself with how much he suddenly wanted it to be true. "Come hell or high water, I'll see to that. See to that." Dawn crawled reluctantly across the Montana sky, its weak light barely penetrating the cabin's frost-rimed windows. The blizzard had subsided to a steady snowfall, but the silence that replaced its howling brought Jackson no comfort. Silence meant the wolves could approach unheard. Catherine's fever had taken hold during the night, her skin alternating between burning hot and deathly cold. The wound on her temple had festered, despite his attempts to clean it, and her breathing came in shallow, painful gasps. "Water," she murmured, her cracked lips barely moving. Jackson pressed a damp cloth to her mouth, letting droplets seep between. Her lips, her eyes opened briefly, unfocused, glassy, before sliding shut again. "My students," she whispered. "They're waiting." "Rest," Jackson said, his voice rough from a sleepless night. "Silver Creek can wait." He needed supplies, proper medicine, bandages, splints for her ankle. The storm had abated enough that he might make it to town, but leaving her alone in this condition could be a death sentence. Movement outside caught his attention. Through the window, he spotted tracks in the fresh snow, not wolves, but a man. On horseback, Jackson reached instinctively for his Winchester. A sharp knock rattled the door. "Cole, you in there?" The voice belonged to Elijah Barnes, Silver Creek's only doctor, a man Jackson had deliberately avoided since settling in the territory. Jackson unbolted the door, rifle still in hand. Barnes stood on the porch, snow crusting his beard, medical, bag clutched in gloved hands. "How'd you find me?" Jackson demanded. Barnes stamped snow from his boots. "Stage driver and passengers made it to town yesterday evening before the worst hit. Said they left a woman behind. Search party couldn't set out in that storm, but I knew your place was closest to where they described." His eyes fell on Catherine. "That her?" Jackson nodded, moving aside to let the doctor enter. Barnes worked methodically, cleaning Catherine's head wound, setting her ankle with practiced hands, and administering laudanum for the pain. All the while, Jackson stood by the window, watching the tree line for wolves, both the four-legged kind and his own demons. "She was lucky you found her," Barnes said, packing his supplies. "Another hour in that cold." "Lucky," Jackson repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. Luck had nothing to do with the calculations of survival, the brutal arithmetic of who lived and who died. He'd seen too many good men fall to random bullets to believe in luck. "Town's been waiting on this schoolteacher for months," Barnes continued, oblivious to Jackson's dark thoughts. "Mayor Jenkins nearly wore out the telegraph line, checking on her arrival date. She'll need weeks to recover." Jackson's tone made it clear he considered this a statement of fact, not an invitation for discussion. Barnes studied him with the same clinical detachment he'd shown Catherine. "You planning to nurse her yourself? Man who hasn't set foot in town? For what, 3 years? 2.5? Jackson met the doctor's gaze, and yes, something like amusement flickered across Barnes's weathered face. "Well, I'll be back in 3 days to check on her, assuming the weather holds. Change the dressing twice daily. Keep her warm, but watch the fever." He hesitated at the door. And Cole? Might do you some good too, having someone to look after. Besides those ornery cattle of yours. Jackson didn't respond, merely bolted the door behind the doctor. Through the window, he watched Barnes mount up and disappear into the swirling snow, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake in accepting this responsibility. Catherine stirred, the laudanum dragging her into a fitful sleep. Jackson checked the fire, added more wood, and settled back into the chair that had become his post. His back ached, his eye burned from exhaustion, but he'd gone longer without sleep during the war. The war. Always it came back to those blood-soaked fields, to the screams of dying men calling for mothers who couldn't hear them. Jackson scrubbed a hand across his face, feeling the ridge of scar tissue that ran from brow to jaw, a permanent reminder of his survival when so many hadn't. "James," Catherine murmured, turning restlessly. "James, don't go." The name struck Jackson like a physical blow. Not her father or brother. The way she spoke it carried too much intimacy. A husband. Fiancé. The Boston schoolteacher suddenly became more complicated, her presence in his cabin more intrusive. "Hush now," he said, more roughly than intended. Her eyes fluttered open, clearer than before. "You're not James." "No, ma'am." Jackson stayed in his chair, keeping his distance. "Name's Jackson Cole. Found you in the storm yesterday." Catherine struggled to sit up, wincing as movement jarred her broken ankle. "I remember pieces. The stagecoach overturned. The others left to find help." Shame colored her voice. "I couldn't keep up with my ankle." "They left you to die," Jackson said flatly. "No point sugarcoating the truth." Catherine's gaze dropped to her hands, pale against the rough wool blanket. They had their own survival to consider. The lack of bitterness in her response surprised him. Most would rage against such abandonment. "The doctor's been," Jackson continued, nodding toward her splintered ankle. "Says you'll heal, given time and rest." "Doctor? From Silver Creek?" Hope brightened her face. "Then they know I'm alive? That I'll still come teach?" "They know. But you won't be teaching anyone for weeks, maybe months." The hope dimmed. "I can't impose on you for so long. Perhaps I could convalesce in town." "Trail's impassable," Jackson cut her off. "Will be until the spring thaw. Doctor barely made it here today, and he knows these mountains better than most." Catherine absorbed this information, her composure. Remarkable for someone who'd nearly died and now found herself stranded with a stranger. "Then it seems I'm at your mercy, Mr. Cole." Something in her phrasing made Jackson uncomfortable. "You're at the mercy of your own body, Mom. I'm just providing the shelter." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Nevertheless, I'm grateful." She studied him openly, her gaze lingering on his scar. "You're not what I expected." "And what did you expect?" The question came out harsher than intended. "From the stories in town, nothing. They said the North Valley recluse spoke to no one, traded only when absolutely necessary, and once pulled a gun on Mayor Jenkins when he tried to collect property taxes." She paused. "Yet you risked your life to save mine." Jackson turned away, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "Don't read too much into it. Anyone would have done the same." "Would they?" Catherine asked softly. "The stagecoach passengers didn't." The simple truth of her words hung in the air between them. Jackson busied himself preparing a thin stew from preserved vegetables and the last of his venison. The cabin filled with savory steam, momentarily masking the smells of medicine and sickness. "You should eat," he said, placing a bowl beside her. "Doctor says you need strength to fight the fever." Catherine accepted the bowl with murmured thanks, but her hands trembled too badly to hold the spoon. Jackson watched her struggle for a moment before wordlessly taking the utensil and holding a spoonful to her lips. "I'm not an invalid," she protested weakly. "Evidence suggests otherwise." He offered another spoonful. "Eat." Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They fell into an uneasy silence as Jackson fed her, both avoiding the strange intimacy of the moment. When the bowl was empty, Catherine's eyelids grew heavy, the laudanum reclaiming her consciousness. "Thank you," she murmured, as sleep overtook her, "for seeing me." Jackson didn't understand her meaning, but something in those words, in the way she said them, burrowed under his skin like a splinter. "For seeing me," as if being seen was a gift and not a danger. He moved to the window, watching as fresh snow erased their tracks, Barnes's visit, any evidence of human presence. The isolation that had once been his refuge now felt like a trap. Two souls locked together until spring, one broken in body, the other in spirit. Outside, a lone wolf called into the vastness, its howl echoing across the valley. In the chair by Catherine's bedside, Jackson Cole began the long watch of another sunless day, wondering which would prove more dangerous, the winter wilderness or the wounded woman who had brought humanity back to his door. Days blurred together in the isolated cabin. Catherine's fever broke on the third night, leaving her weak but lucid. Jackson maintained his vigilance, sleeping only in brief stretches, always with one ear tuned to her breathing and one eye on the door. "You don't sleep," Catherine observed on the morning of the fifth day. She sat propped against the headboard, color finally returning to her cheeks. Jackson glanced up from cleaning his rifle. "I sleep enough. Is it because of me, or is it because of them?" She nodded toward the window, where wolf tracks had appeared again in the fresh snow. "Both," he answered, surprising himself with his honesty. "Wolves are just hungry. It's people you can't trust." Catherine considered this. "Yet you trusted the doctor." "Barnes is different." Jackson reassembled the rifle with practiced efficiency. "War medic, seen the same things I have. And what things are those, Mr. Cole?" Her voice remained gentle, but her question cut straight to what he'd been avoiding. Jackson's hands stilled on the weapon. "Things no amount of telling would make you understand." "Try me," Catherine challenged, a strength in her voice that hadn't been there before. "I may be a schoolteacher from Boston, but I'm not made of porcelain." Jackson studied her, the quiet determination in her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. For the first time, he wondered what hardships she might have faced before coming west. "Antietam," he said finally, "bloodiest day of the war. Over 20,000 dead or wounded in 12 hours. The memories surfaced like corpses in a flooded field. "I was a scout, sent ahead to report on Confederate positions, caught a saber across the face on my way back." He gestured to his scar, the story of his wound easier to tell than what came after. "Missed the worst of the fighting because of it. My entire company wiped out while I lay in a field hospital." Catherine's eyes held no pity, only a steady understanding that unsettled him more than sympathy would have. "Survivor's guilt," she said softly. "You lived while they died." "It's not guilt," Jackson snapped. "It's accounting. Every man's life has a ledger. Mine shows a debt I can't repay." "To whom?" Catherine asked. The question brought him up short. To whom indeed? The dead couldn't collect. A god, if he existed, seemed indifferent to such balances. "You're surprisingly direct for a lady," he deflected. A shadow crossed Catherine's face. "Perhaps I left my ladylike qualities in Boston, along with other pretenses." Jackson recognized the darkness in her tone. It matched his own when speaking of the past. For the first time he wondered what had driven this refined woman to the frontier. "Why Silver Creek?" he asked. "Seems a long way from finishing school." "It is," she agreed. Then, after a moment's hesitation, added, "I came because no one here knows Catherine Winters, daughter of Judge Edward Winters, jilted fiancée of James Thornton, disgrace to Boston society. Jackson raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. James was... Catherine searched for words. Everything a proper young lady should want. Wealthy, connected, charming in company. Her fingers twisted in the blanket. And cruel in private. The kind of cruelty that leaves no visible marks. Understanding dawned. You ran, Catherine nodded, after breaking our engagement. My father gave me a choice, marry James or be disowned. A bitter smile touched her lips. I chose freedom, though freedom has proven more perilous than I anticipated. The confession hung between them, changing the air in the cabin. No longer strangers forced together by circumstance, they had become conspirators against their respective pasts. I'd say you chose well, Jackson offered, the closest thing to comfort he could manage. Better a blizzard than a cage. Indeed, Mr. Cole. Catherine's smile warmed, though I may revise that opinion when you change my bandages again. The attempt at levity surprised a short laugh from Jackson, the sound strange to his own ears. How long since he'd laughed? Since Antietam. Before? The doctor returned that afternoon as promised, pronouncing Catherine's progress remarkable. Fevers gone, wounds healing clean, he told Jackson outside the cabin, voice low to prevent Catherine from overhearing. But that ankle needs proper immobilization. She'll need to stay off it completely for at least 4 more weeks. She doesn't have 4 weeks, Jackson argued. Town's expecting her. Barnes shrugged. Town can keep expecting. Nature doesn't bend to human schedules. After the doctor left, Jackson found Catherine attempting to stand, using the bed frame for support. What do you think you're doing? He demanded, crossing the room in 3 strides. Testing my limits, she replied through gritted teeth, sweat beading on her forehead from the effort. Jackson caught her as her good leg buckled, lifting her effortlessly back onto the bed. Your limit is that ankle. Doctor says 4 more weeks before you put weight on it. Catherine's face fell. 4 weeks? But my position... We'll wait, Jackson interrupted, unless you fancy teaching from a pine box, His bluntness startled another laugh from her. You have quite the bedside manner, Mr. Cole. Jackson, he corrected, the familiarity slipping out before he could stop it. If you're staying 4 weeks, might as well use my given name. Jackson, she repeated, the name soft on her lips. Then you must call me Catherine. He nodded, suddenly aware he was still supporting her, his hands at her waist. He stepped back abruptly. Need to check the livestock. He grabbed his coat and fled the suddenly confining cabin. The bitter cold was a welcome distraction from the warmth Catherine Winters had brought into his carefully constructed isolation. In the barn, midnight nickered a greeting while the 3 milk cows regarded him with placid indifference. Jackson forked fresh hay, his mind churning. 4 more weeks. 4 weeks of close quarters, of conversations that stripped away pretenses, of watching Catherine grow stronger while his own defenses weakened. 4 weeks of remembering how to be human when he'd spent years becoming something else. The barn door creaked behind him. Jackson turned, rifle instinctively in hand, to find Matt Jenkins, the mayor's 17-year-old son, frozen in the doorway. Easy, Mr. Cole, the boy said, hands raised. Pa sent me with supplies for the teacher. Jackson lowered the weapon. Your pa knows the trail's barely passable. Risking your neck for what? Books? Matt shrugged, dragging a laden travois into the barn. Miss Winters' trunks arrived on the stage before the accident. Pa figured she'd want her things. He glanced toward the cabin. How is she? Healing, Jackson replied curtly. Tell your pa thanks for the supplies, but no more visitors until the doctor says it's safe. Matt nodded, but his eyes held the curiosity of youth. Folks in town are talking about you taking her in. Jackson's jaw tightened. Folks ought to mind their business. Just saying it's good what you did. Matt shuffled his feet. Most thought you were some kind of war-crazy hermit, my pa included. And now? Now they're not sure what to think. Matt's honesty was refreshingly direct. Doc Barnes says you've been caring for her like she's kin. Jackson turned back to his chores. Doc Barnes talks too much. After Matt departed, Jackson examined the travois contents. 3 trunks of varying sizes, all bearing Catherine's name, stenciled in prim black lettering. He carried them one by one to the cabin, setting them at the foot of the bed. Catherine's eyes widened. "My things! How?" "Mayor's boy brought them," Jackson explained. "Said they arrived before the accident." Catherine ran her hands over the largest trunk, her expression a mixture of relief and trepidation. "A piece of Boston, delivered to your doorstep." She glanced up at him. "Would you open it for me? The key is on a chain around my neck." Jackson hesitated, then nodded. Catherine drew a small key from beneath her borrowed shirt. His shirt, he realized with an odd jolt, and handed it to him. Their fingers brushed a fleeting contact that nonetheless sent awareness through him like a current. The trunk lid creaked open, revealing neatly packed dresses, books, and personal items. Catherine reached eagerly for a small leather-bound volume on top. "Whitman," she explained, clutching the book to her chest. "My one rebellion at finishing school. The headmistress would have burned it had she found it." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous reading for a lady?" "The most dangerous kind," Catherine smiled, "the sort that makes one question what one has been taught." Something in her expression, a flash of the woman she might have been without society's constraints, caught Jackson off guard. He looked away, focusing instead on the trunk's contents. "Lot of dresses for a school teacher," he observed. "Most impractical," Catherine agreed. "I hadn't quite grasped what frontier life would entail." Jackson pulled out a midnight blue gown, the material rich beneath his calloused fingers. "You left wealth behind." "I left a prison." Catherine's voice hardened. "Every stitch of those fine dresses came with expectations, obligations, each one a reminder of what I was supposed to be." Jackson understood confinement, though his had been self-imposed. "And what were you supposed to be?" "Ornamental, silent, obedient." Each word fell like a stone. A suitable wife for a suitable man, regardless of his private cruelties. The garment in Jackson's hands suddenly felt tainted. He returned it to the trunk, noticing a small daguerreotype nestled among the clothing. A stern-faced man in judge's robes, a wilting woman beside him, and a younger Catherine, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Your family?" Catherine nodded. "My father and stepmother. My real mother died when I was 8. The parallels to his own life, the loss of parents, the search for purpose, created an unexpected bridge between them." Jackson closed the trunk, locking away the reminders of Catherine's former life, but the connection remained, tenuous, yet undeniable. "You should rest," he said, retreating to his customary distance. "I've done nothing but rest," Catherine protested. "I've been meaning to ask. Do you have any books? I could read aloud, perhaps repay your kindness with some entertainment." Jackson hesitated, then crossed to a small shelf above his desk. He returned with 3 worn volumes, a Bible, a manual on animal husbandry, and a dog-eared copy of the Iliad. Catherine's surprise showed clearly. "Homer! Not what I expected from a war-crazy hermit," Jackson finished dryly. She had the grace to blush. "I was going to say a rancher." "My father taught classics before consumption took him," Jackson explained, the words emerging more easily than he'd anticipated. "Read to me every night as a boy. Said Homer understood war better than any general." Catherine opened the book carefully, treating it with the reverence of someone who understood a volume's worth beyond its content. "Would you like me to read it to you now?" The offer hung in the air, innocent yet profound, an invitation to share something beyond necessity, beyond survival. Jackson found himself nodding before he'd consciously decided, as Catherine's voice filled the cabin, bringing ancient warriors and fallen heroes to life. Jackson felt something shift inside him, like ice breaking up on a river after months of winter. Dangerous, this thawing, dangerous and inevitable as spring itself. Weeks passed, marked by the steady rhythm of ranch life. Jackson tended his livestock before dawn, repaired what needed fixing, and chopped enough wood to keep the cabin warm against the deepening cold. Catherine's presence transformed these solitary routines into something approaching purpose, each task now performed with an awareness of her needs, her comfort. "Your penmanship puts mine to shame," Catherine remarked one evening, watching Jackson record the day's tasks in a leather-bound ledger. Outside, the wind moaned through the pines, a lonely sound that made the cabin's warmth more precious. Jackson glanced up, surprised to find her observing him. Military training, commanding officer believed sloppy writing reflected a sloppy mind. "And your mind is anything but sloppy," Catherine said. The observation offered without flattery. She sat. In the wooden chair he'd moved beside the bed, her splintered ankle propped on a stool, a colourful quilt across her lap. 2 weeks of proper nutrition had restored some fullness to her face, softening the sharper edges of her cheekbones. Jackson returned to his ledger, uncomfortable with her scrutiny, yet oddly pleased by it. Just practical. Man needs to know what is done and what needs doing. The very foundation of education, Catherine smiled. Perhaps you missed your calling as a teacher. The idea was so incongruous that Jackson nearly laughed. Most parents wouldn't want their children learning from a man like me. A man who reads Homer, maintains immaculate records, and saves strangers from blizzards. Catherine raised an eyebrow. I imagine they could do worse. Her ability to see beyond his scars, both visible and hidden, unsettled him. During their 3 weeks together, Catherine had developed an unnerving talent for finding the man he'd been before Antietam, the one he'd buried beneath layers of solitude and silence. "You've been teaching long?" he asked, changing the subject. 3 years at a girls' finishing school, but that was... She hesitated. "Different," Jackson finished for her. "Yes." Catherine's fingers traced the quilt's pattern. "I taught young ladies how to recite poetry with proper elocution, how to sketch insipid landscapes, and how to appear interested in tedious conversations. Here, I'll be teaching children to read, to cipher, to understand the world beyond these mountains." "Real teaching," Jackson observed. "Real living," Catherine corrected. She held up the book of Whitman's poetry. "Listen to this. I am larger, better than I thought. I did not know I held so much goodness." Jackson recognized the passage. He'd read it himself in the days before the war, when possibilities seemed endless. Whitman saw a different America than most. He saw people as they could be, not merely as they are. Catherine closed the book. "That's what I hope to do in Silver. Greek, help children see their own potential, regardless of what society expects." Her passion reminded Jackson of his father's, the same belief that knowledge could transform, that minds were meant to grow beyond their circumstances. A belief Jackson had lost somewhere between his father's death and Antietam's blood-soaked. "Ye fields, noble aim," he said, then added more quietly, "hope it survives contact with reality." Catherine studied him, her green eyes searching. "Your cynicism isn't as complete as you pretend, Jackson. If it were, I would have died in that storm." Before he could formulate a response, a loud crack from outside split the night. Jackson was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "Stay here," he ordered, moving to the window. Through frosted glass, he made out a dark shape near the barn, too large for a wolf. Another crack, the sound of breaking wood. "What is it?" Catherine whispered. "Someone's trying to break into the barn." Jackson checked his ammunition. Mind. Calculating possibilities. Rustlers were uncommon in winter, but desperate men grew bolder in lean times. "You're not going out there," Catherine said, alarm edging her voice. "Not alone." Jackson gave her a hard look. "Stay put. Bar the door behind me." He slipped out into the bitter night, moving silently despite the snow. The landscape glowed blue under a three-quarter moon, shadows sharp against pristine white. Another crack echoed from the barn's far side. Jackson circled wide, using the cover of pine trees. A solitary figure struggled with the rear barn door, cursing as frozen hinges resisted. Not rustlers then, just one man. Jackson approached from behind, rifle raised. "That's far enough," he called. The figure whirled, revealing a gaunt face beneath. A ragged hat, a boy, no more than 16, his hollow cheeks and desperate eyes telling their own story. "Don't shoot," the boy pleaded, hands rising shakily. "Just needed somewhere warm. Didn't know anyone lived here." Jackson maintained his distance, rifle unwavering. "Where'd you come from?" "Mining camp up north. Pa died in a collapse last month. Company men took our cabin." The boy's eyes darted between Jackson and the barn. "Been walking 3 days." The story rang true. Mining companies were notorious for evicting families of dead workers. But trust didn't come easily to Jackson anymore. "Anyone with you?" The boy shook his head. "Just me. Ma died years back. No siblings." Jackson considered his options. Sending the boy back into the night would be a death sentence, but bringing an unknown element into the cabin with Catherine felt equally dangerous. "You can sleep in the barn," he decided. "There's hay in the loft. But," he added, leveling the rifle, "you try entering the main house or stealing anything, I'll shoot without asking questions." "Understood?" Relief washed over the boy's face. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Jackson escorted him into the barn, watched him climb to the loft, then secured the doors properly before returning to the cabin. Catherine had dragged herself to the window, her face pale with worry. "I told you to stay put," Jackson said, helping her back to bed. "And I chose not to listen," she replied unrepentantly. "What happened?" "Boy from a mining camp looking for shelter." Jackson hung his coat, brushing off snow. "Let him stay in the barn." Catherine's eyes widened. "In this cold? Jackson, he'll freeze." "Barn's warmer than the alternative." Jackson countered. "Don't know him, don't trust him, he's just a boy. Trust him, he's just—" "Boys can kill same as men," Jackson cut her off. "Learned that in the war." Catherine fell silent, recognition of his concern settling between them. After a moment she spoke again, her voice gentle but firm. "At least take him some food, please." Jackson wanted to refuse, to maintain the boundary between caution and compassion, but something in Catherine's expression, not pity but faith in his better nature, wore down his resistance. "Fine," he relented, preparing a plate of leftover stew and biscuits, "but he stays in the barn." When Jackson returned from delivering the food, Catherine was propped up in bed, her expression thoughtful. "You're not as hard as you pretend," she observed. Jackson busied himself stoking the fire. "Don't romanticize it. Boy's still a stranger, and strangers are dangerous until proven otherwise. Is that why you live so far from town, to avoid having to decide who's dangerous and who isn't?" The question cut closer than she likely intended. Jackson turned to face her, something in her directness demanding honesty. "After the war, I couldn't tell the difference anymore," he admitted. "Every face looked like a potential threat. Easier to avoid them all. Until now," Catherine said softly. "Until you," Jackson corrected, the distinction important somehow. Morning brought fresh snow and reluctant decisions. The boy, Daniel, he'd called himself, worked eagerly to earn his keep, mucking stalls and feeding livestock with the efficiency of someone raised to labor. "He needs more than one night," Catherine insisted over breakfast, watching through the window as Daniel chopped wood with Jackson's spare axe. "Look at him, he's half-starved." Jackson studied the boy's determined swings, recognizing the desperate energy of someone with nowhere else to go. "Could use help with the south fence," he conceded grudgingly. "Storm damaged it badly." Catherine's smile was worth the risk, Jackson decided. She'd grown stronger daily, moving around the cabin with the aid of a crutch he'd fashioned from pine. Her natural vitality had begun to reassert itself, bringing color and life to corners of his existence that had long been grey. "Your ankle's healing well," he remarked, noticing she put more weight on it each day. "Dr. Barnes says I might try teaching from a chair when he returns next week," Catherine replied, hope brightening her voice. "Mayor Jenkins sent word that they've prepared living quarters behind the schoolhouse." The news twisted something in Jackson's chest, a sensation he refused to name. Of course she would leave once healed. The arrangement had always been temporary, a matter of survival. Her departure would simply restore his life to its previous state. So why did that prospect suddenly seem hollow? Daniel's presence provided welcome distraction. The boy proved hard-working and respectful, maintaining a careful distance that Jackson recognized as the wariness of someone accustomed to disappointment. For 3 days, he slept in the barn and worked from dawn until dusk, earning each meal with visible gratitude. On the 4th evening, snow fell so heavily that the path between house and barn nearly disappeared. Catherine watched Jackson prepare Daniel's dinner plate with concern. "You can't possibly expect him to stay out there tonight," she said. "He'll freeze to death." Jackson hesitated. The boy had given no cause for suspicion, had worked without complaint despite obvious hunger and exhaustion, but old habits died hard. One night, he conceded finally, by the fire, "I'll keep watch." Daniel entered the cabin with wide-eyed caution, taking in the modest comforts with the appreciation of one who had known true deprivation. His gaze lingered on Catherine, confusion evident. "Ma'am," he managed, removing his tattered hat. "Didn't know there was a lady here." "Miss Winters is the new schoolteacher for Silver Creek," Jackson explained, "recovering from injuries." Understanding dawned in Daniel's eyes. "You're the one they've been waiting for. Mayor's been sending riders out every week since the accident." "They have?" Catherine asked, surprise evident. Daniel nodded eagerly. "Whole town's built the school special. Got desks from Denver and everything." Pride colored Catherine's cheeks. This tangible evidence that she was wanted, expected, seemed to strengthen her in ways Jackson's care alone couldn't. For the first time, he understood what her teaching position truly meant. Not just employment, but purpose. "You ever been to school, Daniel?" Catherine asked as they ate. The boy shook his head. "Pa taught me some reading. Numbers, too, for measuring timber cuts. Would you like to learn more?" Her tone held no condescension, only genuine interest. Daniel glanced uncertainly at Jackson before answering, "Yes'm, always wanted to read proper books." "Then consider this your first lesson," Catherine said, reaching for her copy of Whitman. "We'll start with something truly American." Jackson watched as Catherine transformed, teacher's passion animating her features as she guided Daniel through the poem. The boy's initial awkwardness gave way to concentration, his weather-roughened fingers tracing the words as Catherine explained their meaning. In that moment, Jackson saw what Silver Creek would gain when Catherine left his cabin, a teacher who believed in possibilities, who could see beyond circumstances to potential, and he understood with sudden clarity what he would lose. That night, as Daniel slept soundly by the fire and Catherine's breathing deepened in slumber, Jackson sat watch by the window, confronting the truth he'd been avoiding. Catherine Winters had breached walls he'd spent years building, not by force but by simply existing. Her courage, her compassion, her unflagging belief that life held purpose beyond mere survival. And soon she would leave, taking that light with her, leaving him in darkness he'd once welcomed, but now recognized as the prison it truly was. Dr. Barnes arrived as promised the following week, his medical bag swinging from mitten-covered hands as he stomped snow from his boots on Jackson's porch. His shrewd eyes took in the cabin's changed atmosphere, the makeshift classroom, at the table where Catherine was teaching Daniel his letters, the extra chair pulled close to the fire, the stack of mended clothing folded neatly on a shelf. "Well now," he remarked, his breath clouding in the cold air. "Looks like you've established quite the household, Cole." Jackson bristled at the implication but said nothing, merely stepping aside to let the doctor enter. Catherine looked up with a welcoming smile, setting aside the slate she'd been using to demonstrate proper penmanship. "Dr. Barnes," she greeted him. "You remember Daniel?" The boy ducked his head respectfully. "Sir." Barnes nodded, then turned his attention to Catherine's ankle. "Let's have a look at that leg, shall we? Young man, perhaps you could help Cole check on the livestock while I examine my patient." Jackson recognized the doctor's tactic, creating privacy for the examination while simultaneously removing him from the cabin. Still, he followed the suggestion, gesturing for Daniel to accompany him outside. In the barn, Daniel worked silently, alongside Jackson, forking fresh hay for the livestock with practiced efficiency. The boy had filled out over the past week, regular meals putting meat on his bones, hard work bringing color to his previously pallid face. "Miss Winters says you fought at Antietam," Daniel ventured finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "My pa was at Gettysburg, Confederate side." Jackson paused, studying the boy with new understanding. "That a problem for you?" Daniel shook his head. "Pa said when it was over, blue or gray didn't matter much, just men trying to live with what they'd seen." The simple wisdom of it struck Jackson with unexpected force. "Your pa sounds like a sensible man." "He was," Daniel agreed quietly. "Taught me to judge folks by how they act, not what they've been through." The conversation fell away as they completed their chores, but something had shifted, an unspoken understanding between them, forged in the shared recognition of loss. When they returned to the cabin, Dr. Barnes was packing his supplies while Catherine sat at the edge of the bed, her face alight with barely contained excitement. "Good news," Barnes announced, snapping his bag closed. "The ankle's healing better than expected. Still no weight-bearing for another week, but after that, Miss Winters can begin teaching, provided she remains seated and doesn't overexert herself." Catherine's joy was palpable. "I can be in Silver Creek by next Monday?" "If the weather holds." "And someone drives you?" Barnes confirmed. "Mayor's already preparing your quarters." He glanced at Jackson. "Thought you might want to handle the transportation yourself, Cole, seeing as you've come this far with her recovery." The invitation, or challenge, hung in the air. Jackson felt Catherine's eyes on him, waiting for his response. "I'll see her safely there," he said finally, the words scraping his throat like gravel. Barnes nodded, satisfied. "Good man. Daniel, mind helping an old doctor load his supplies? These bones aren't what they used to be." The transparent excuse to leave Jackson and Catherine alone brought a flush to her cheeks, but she remained silent until the door closed behind them. "You don't have to take me," she said softly. "Mayor Jenkins would send someone." "I said I would." Jackson busied himself stoking the fire, avoiding her gaze. "A week Monday, weather permitting." Catherine studied him, her perception uncomfortably acute. "What will you do? After I'm gone?" "Same as before," Jackson answered too quickly. "Ranch doesn't run itself." "And Daniel?" The question had been hovering at the edges of Jackson's thoughts since the boy's arrival. "He works hard. Could use help with spring calving." Catherine's smile warmed something cold within him. "He needs a home, Jackson. Somewhere to belong." "Might have found one," Jackson admitted grudgingly. "If he wants it." The days that followed took on a strange quality, simultaneously stretched and compressed, each moment weighted with the knowledge of its impermanence. Catherine threw herself into preparation for her teaching duties, drafting lessons and practicing standing for longer periods each day. Jackson extended his work hours, repairing fences that could have waited until spring, hunting game they didn't need. Only in the evenings, when the three of them gathered around the fire, did time seem to move at its proper pace. Catherine would read aloud from her books, her voice bringing distant worlds into the cabin. Daniel would ask questions, his quick mind grasping concepts that had eluded Jackson at twice his age. And Jackson himself would listen, contributing rarely but absorbing everything. The cadence of Catherine's voice, the enthusiasm in Daniel's responses, the feeling of something he'd never expected to find in his self-imposed exile. Family. The realization hit him during Catherine's reading of the Odyssey on their final evening together. Tomorrow, weather permitting, he would drive her to Silver Creek in the sleigh he'd spent 3 days refurbishing. Her trunks were packed, her lesson plans finalized, her eyes bright with anticipation for the new chapter awaiting her. Jackson watched her lips form the ancient words of Odysseus's homecoming, and understood with painful clarity that he had found and lost his own home in the space of 6 weeks. Lost it without ever acknowledging what it was. "That's enough for tonight," Catherine said, closing the book as Daniel's eyelids grew heavy. "We all need rest before tomorrow's journey." The boy nodded sleepily, withdrawing to his pallet by the fire. Soon his gentle snores filled the cabin, leaving Jackson and Catherine in a pocket of silence that seemed to demand words neither was prepared to offer. "Thank you," Catherine said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." Jackson nodded, unable to articulate the storm of emotions her simple gratitude provoked. "Just did what anyone would." "We both know that's not true." Catherine's gaze held his, unwavering. "You saved my life, Jackson. But more than that, you helped me find my strength again. You were never weak," he countered, "just wounded. Different thing entirely." Catherine smiled, the expression tinged with sadness. "Perhaps that's true for both of us." The implication that he too was merely wounded, not broken beyond repair, threatened to unravel the careful distance he'd maintained these final days. "You should sleep," he said gruffly, retreating to safer ground. "Long journey tomorrow." "But..." Catherine wasn't finished. "Will you visit in Silver Creek? Will you visit in Silver Creek?" The question caught him off guard. "Town and I don't much agree with each other." "The town or the people in it?" Catherine pressed. "Both." Jackson rose, moving to the window to escape her penetrating gaze. Outside, stars glittered coldly in the clear night sky, promising fair weather for tomorrow's journey. "I'll miss this place," Catherine said softly. "I'll miss—" "Don't," Jackson interrupted, more harshly than intended. "Silver Creek is where you belong, where you can do what you came here to do." "And where do you belong, Jackson?" The question hung between them, unanswerable. Morning brought crystalline skies and bitter cold, the landscape transformed into a sea of blinding white. Jackson hitched the horses to the sleigh, while Catherine said her goodbyes to Daniel, who would remain at the ranch until they returned. "I've left books for you," she told the boy, pressing a small volume into his hands. "Practice your letters while I'm gone, and perhaps you can visit the school once it's established." Daniel nodded, fighting manfully against the emotion tightening his throat. "Yes, ma'am. I'll work hard." The drive to Silver Creek took place largely in silence, the runners of the sleigh hissing over packed snow, the horses' breath forming clouds. In the frigid air, Catherine sat wrapped in furs beside Jackson, occasionally pointing out the beauty of the winter landscape, but mainly lost in thoughts of what awaited her. Silver Creek appeared first as smoke from chimneys, then as a cluster of buildings nestled in the valley below. It was smaller than Catherine had described, but larger than Jackson remembered from his infrequent trading visits. A proper town now, with a church spire and new timber buildings along the main street. As they approached, Jackson felt the familiar tightening in his chest that accompanied proximity to crowds. His hands clenched on the reins, his breathing shortened, his senses heightened to detect threats from any direction. "It will be all right," Catherine said quietly, noticing his distress. "These are good people." "You don't know that yet," Jackson replied, But her reassurance had its intended effect, easing some of the tension from his shoulders. Their arrival caused immediate sensation. Faces appeared in windows, doors opened despite the cold, and by the time Jackson drew the sleigh to a halt before the new schoolhouse, a small crowd had gathered. Mayor Jenkins hurried forward, his round face beaming beneath a fur hat. "Miss Winters! At last!" He helped Catherine down from the sleigh with exaggerated care. "The whole town's been waiting for your arrival." "I'm deeply sorry for the delay," Catherine replied, her natural poise asserting itself as she faced her new community. "But thanks to Mr. Cole's extraordinary care, I've recovered fully." All eyes turned to Jackson, who remained stiffly in the sleigh, uncomfortable under the collective scrutiny. Mayor Jenkins approached, hand extended. "Silver Creek owes you a debt, Cole," he said. "Rescuing our teacher, nursing her back to health, never thought to see the day." Jackson accepted the handshake briefly, acknowledging the mayor with a curt nod. "Just did what needed doing." Jenkins's wife bustled forward, a plump woman with kind eyes and an air of efficient authority. "Miss Winters must be exhausted from the journey. Come, my dear, let's get you settled in your new home." The crowd parted to reveal the schoolhouse, a handsome building of fresh-cut pine, with large windows to admit light and a small bell tower crowning its roof. Behind it stood a modest cabin, smoke curling invitingly from its chimney. "Your living quarters," Mrs. Jenkins explained proudly. "We've stocked it with provisions and necessities. The school itself is ready whenever you feel strong enough to begin teaching." Catherine turned to Jackson, still seated in the sleigh. "Won't you come in, see where I'll be teaching?" The invitation, offered before the entire town, placed Jackson at a crossroads he'd been avoiding for 6 weeks. To accept meant stepping back into the world of people, of relationships and expectations. To refuse meant returning to solitude, now rendered hollow by her absence. "Need to get back before dark," he said finally. "Retreat the safer choice." "Daniel's waiting." Disappointment flickered across Catherine's face, quickly masked. "Of course, please give him my best." She hesitated, then stepped closer to the sleigh, lowering her voice. "Will I see you again, Jackson?" Before he could formulate an answer, Mayor Jenkins interrupted. "You must stay for supper, Cole. Least we can do. My wife's prepared a welcome feast for Miss Winters, and you're our guest of honor." The collective expectation of the gathered townspeople pressed against Jackson like a physical force. Catherine waited, hope warring with understanding in her eyes. "Another time," Jackson managed, gathering the reins. "Long ride back." He saw the hurt his refusal caused her, but could find no words to bridge the chasm between the man he was and the man she believed he could be. With a final nod to the assembled crowd, he turned the sleigh and headed back toward the mountain trail, the sound of Silver Creek's welcome celebration fading behind him. The return journey stretched endlessly, each mile increasing the hollow. Feeling in his chest, the cabin, when he finally reached it, stood silent and dim, Daniel having ventured to the barn to complete evening chores. Jackson moved through the familiar space, stoking the fire, lighting lamps, actions performed countless times before Catherine's arrival. Yet now each movement felt mechanical, divorced from purpose. His gaze fell on the bed where she had lain, the chair where she had read aloud, the table where she had taught Daniel his letters. Traces of her lingered everywhere, from the neatly folded quilt to the small shelf of books she'd rearranged by subject matter. 6 weeks had transformed his refuge into something else entirely, and transformed him in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. Daniel entered, stamping snow from his boots. "Miss Winters get there all right?" "Whole town turned out to welcome her," Jackson confirmed, busying himself with preparations for their simple dinner. The boy studied him with unexpected perception. "But you didn't stay." "Had to get back," Jackson said, the excuse hollow even to his own ears. Daniel nodded, accepting the explanation without challenge, but his next words cut to the heart of what Jackson hadn't acknowledged. "She changed things," the boy observed quietly, "made this place feel different." Jackson paused, the truth of the statement impossible to deny. "Yes," he admitted finally. "She did." "You could go back," Daniel suggested, his young face earnest. "In the lamplight. Silver Creek ain't so far." "It's far enough," Jackson replied, effectively ending the conversation. That night, as Daniel slept and the cabin settled into familiar creaks and sighs, Jackson stood at the window, gazing toward the distant lights of Silver Creek. Catherine would be settling into her new home now, perhaps planning tomorrow's lessons, or writing in the journal he'd seen among her possessions. The thought of her brightness constrained within. The narrow expectations of a frontier town struck him with unexpected force. Silver Creek needed her vision, her passion for learning, her belief in possibilities beyond survival. But what did Catherine Winters need? Jackson turned. From the window, unable to pursue that line of thought to its inevitable conclusion. He had made his choice years ago, turning away from the world that had taken so much from him. One woman, however extraordinary, couldn't change that fundamental truth. Yet, as he finally sought sleep, Jackson couldn't escape the knowledge that something had shifted irrevocably within him, that Catherine Winters had awakened parts of himself he'd thought long dead, leaving him stranded at a crossroads between the solitude he'd chosen and the connection he suddenly craved. 3 weeks passed. The February sun gained strength, turning noon snow to slush before night's freeze hardened it again. Jackson threw himself into ranch work with grim determination, extending chores into exhaustion, hoping physical fatigue might quiet his mind. Daniel matched his pace without complaint, the boy's resilience a silent rebuke to Jackson's brooding. "Got a letter for you," Daniel announced one evening, returning from his supply run to town with bulging saddlebags. He pulled a cream-colored envelope from his coat, the handwriting unmistakably Catherine's, elegant yet practical, like the woman herself. Jackson stared at the letter as though it might burn him. "You saw her." Daniel nodded, unpacking coffee. "And salt. Teaching full-time now, 26 pupils, town's real proud." He hesitated. "She asked about you. What did you tell her?" "The truth." Daniel met his gaze directly. "That you work from sunrise past sunset, that you don't talk much, that the cabin feels empty." Jackson turned away, uncomfortable with the boy's perception. Shouldn't have said that last part. Shouldn't have to. Lie either. Daniel placed the letter on the table. "She's not what you expected, is she?" The question startled Jackson with its insight. "No," he admitted finally, "she wasn't." Later, alone by lamplight, Jackson opened Catherine's letter, her words flowing across the page with the same quiet strength that had filled her voice. "Dear Jackson, Silver Creek welcomes me with open arms, yet I find myself looking to the mountains more often than is sensible. The school thrives, children hungry for knowledge in ways that would astonish my former Boston colleagues. They bring me fresh eggs and handkerchiefs embroidered by mothers eager to show their appreciation. Their gratitude humbles me daily. Yet, in quiet moments, I miss the honest silence of your cabin, the way firelight caught the pages of Homer, the respect you showed me not as a fragile creature to be protected, but as a person of substance worthy of truth. Daniel tells me you've taken him in permanently. This does not surprise me. Beneath your carefully maintained distance lies a man of profound integrity. The boy needs that example, as I needed your strength during my recovery. My quarters behind the schoolhouse are comfortable, my days fulfilling. I'm becoming the teacher I hoped to be when I left Boston. For this transformation, I owe you more than these inadequate words can express. The town holds a Founders' Day celebration on the last Saturday of February. Perhaps you might attend. My students ask daily about the mountain man who saved their teacher. I've corrected their romantic notions with facts, but children prefer legends. Whatever you decide, please know that you remain in my thoughts. With deepest gratitude, Catherine. Jackson folded the letter carefully, his calloused fingers awkward against the fine paper. Her words conjured her presence so vividly he could almost hear her voice, smell the lavender soap she'd used to wash her hair. Daniel found him later at the barn workbench, methodically repairing a bridle by lamplight. "You sleeping out here now?" the boy asked, pulling his coat tighter against the cold. Jackson didn't look up. "Checking the mare might foal early." The lie hung between them, transparent as spring ice. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, his young face serious beyond his. "Yes. You know, my pa used to say a man spends his life building walls or bridges. Can't do both at once." Jackson's hands stilled on the leather. "Your pa was a wise man." "Mostly drunk," Daniel corrected with surprising candor. "But sober, he saw. In things clear," he hesitated. "Miss Winters sees things clear too." "Go back to the house," Jackson ordered, not unkindly. "Too cold for philosophizing." Daniel obeyed but paused at the door. "Just so you know, I'm riding into town for Founders Day with or without you." In the days that followed, Catherine's letter remained where Jackson had placed it, on the mantel, its presence altering the cabin's atmosphere like a window suddenly opened. He never mentioned it, nor did Daniel, but both were aware of its silent influence. February waned. The appointed Saturday approached. Jackson worked with single-minded focus, speaking only when necessary, retreating further into himself, even as Catherine's written words echoed in his thoughts. On Friday evening, Daniel laid out his cleanest shirt and the new boots Jackson had ordered from the mercantile. His preparations made his intentions clear, without need for discussion. "Town'll be crowded," Jackson observed over supper. "Loud." "Yes, sir." Daniel continued eating, unperturbed, strangers coming in from outlying homesteads. "That's the point of a celebration, I reckon." Jackson pushed his plate away, frustrated by the boy's calm logic. "Roads are muddy, weather could turn." Daniel met his gaze steadily. "You finding reasons not to go, or trying to talk me out of it?" The directness of the question demanded equal honesty. "Both, maybe." "Because you're afraid?" Jackson stiffened. "Caution isn't fear." "No, sir," Daniel agreed. "But sometimes they look the same from the outside." The simple observation struck Jackson with unexpected force. Was it caution that kept him isolated, or fear dressed in practicality's clothing? The war had taught him to anticipate danger, to trust nothing and no one. But Catherine, and now this orphaned boy, had shown him the cost of such vigilance. "I'll saddle the horses at dawn," Jackson said finally. "Town's a 4-hour ride. Want to arrive before noon." Daniel's attempt to hide his triumphant smile failed completely. "Yes, sir." The morning dawned clear and cold, the sun promising warmth by midday. Jackson dressed with unusual care, selecting his least-worn shirt and the leather vest he hadn't used since his last trip to the territorial capital. He trimmed his beard, the scissors unfamiliar in his hand, then stopped, uncertain why he bothered. Daniel wisely made no comment on these preparations, focusing instead on his own excitement. His chatter during their ride about the rumored pie contest, the possibility of music, whether Miss Winters would recognize his improved reading, filled the silence Jackson couldn't break. Silver Creek emerged from the pines transformed. Flags and bunting adorned the main street buildings. Wagons and horses crowded the hitching posts. The usual frontier drabness had given way to celebration colors. Women in their best dresses, men in polished boots and pressed shirts. Jackson felt the familiar tightening in his chest as they approached. Too many people, too much noise, too many possibilities for confrontation. His hand dropped instinctively to his sidearm. "There she is." Daniel's voice cut through his rising anxiety. The boy pointed toward the schoolhouse, where Catherine stood surrounded by children, her burgundy dress a splash of elegance among frontier practicality. She hadn't seen them yet. Jackson could still turn back, spare himself the complexity of emotions her presence provoked. Daniel would understand eventually. Then Catherine looked up. Even at this distance, Jackson saw the moment of recognition cross her face, saw her hand lift in greeting, her smile brightening like sunrise breaking over mountain peaks. Too late for retreat. Jackson dismounted slowly, hyper-aware of curious glances from townspeople who recognized the reclusive rancher. Daniel jumped from his horse with youthful eagerness, already moving toward Catherine. Jackson followed with measured steps, each one a conscious choice against retreat. "You came," Catherine said when he reached her, her voice carrying warmth that belied the simplicity of her greeting. "Daniel wanted to see the celebration," Jackson answered, the deflection automatic. Catherine's knowing smile told him she understood the half-truth. "Well, I'm glad you both made the journey." She turned to include Daniel. "And just in time, my students are performing a recitation in 10 minutes. The schoolhouse had been transformed into a makeshift auditorium, benches arranged before a small platform where nervous children clutched handwritten papers. Jackson found himself guided to a seat near the front, conscious of curious glances from parents who clearly recognized him from town gossip. Catherine moved to the platform with natural grace, her injured ankle showing only the slightest evidence of its recent break. The confidence in her bearing, the way the children responded to her quiet authority, Jackson realized he was seeing the woman she had always been, beneath the vulnerability of injury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly to the room's corners, "my students have prepared a special presentation for Founders' Day. Each has researched a notable American and written a short speech about that person's contributions to our nation." The children stepped forward one by one, some boldly, others barely audible, to deliver their speeches. A freckled girl spoke of Clara Barton's battlefield nursing. A serious boy described Frederick Douglass's fight for freedom. Each presentation reflected Catherine's influence, emphasis on courage, on determination against obstacles, on the power of individual choice. Jackson found himself leaning forward, engaged despite his initial discomfort. These children, many born in frontier hardship, were being given something beyond practical skills. They were being shown possibilities beyond their circumstances. After the final speech, Catherine led the audience in applause, her pride in her. Students evident in every gesture. As the crowd began to disperse toward other festivities, she made her way to Jackson and Daniel. "What did you think?" she asked, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "They were wonderful," Daniel replied enthusiastically, "especially Timmy's speech about the railroad." Catherine smiled, then turned expectantly to Jackson. "You're giving them something valuable," he said, choosing words carefully. "More than just facts." Understanding lit her eyes. "Hope," she agreed, softly. "The same thing you gave me during those weeks in your cabin." Before Jackson could respond, Mayor Jenkins approached, his wife close behind. "Miss Winters, outstanding presentation." The mayor pumped Catherine's hand, then noticed Jackson with poorly concealed surprise. "Cole, didn't expect to see you at our little celebration." "Mr. Cole and Daniel kindly accepted my invitation," Catherine explained smoothly. "I wanted them to see how well the school is progressing." Mrs. Jenkins beamed. "The children adore her, and the whole town's talking about her lending library project. It's merely a shelf of books anyone may borrow," Catherine demurred. "Hardly revolutionary." For Silver Creek, it's practically radical. Mrs. Jenkins laughed. Now, you must all join us for the community dinner. The tables are being set up behind the church. The invitation increased Jackson's discomfort, but Daniel's hopeful expression made refusal difficult. He found himself guided to long tables beneath canvas awnings, seated beside Catherine with Daniel across from them, surrounded by curious townspeople. "This is a surprise," Dr. Barnes commented, settling beside Daniel with a knowing smile at Jackson. "Mountain hermit venturing into civilization." Daniel wanted to come. Jackson repeated his earlier explanation. Did he now? Barnes's skepticism was good-natured. Nothing to do with our schoolteacher's invitation. Before Jackson could form a suitable retort, platters began circulating. Roasted venison, potatoes, early spring greens, fresh bread. The abundance reflected Silver Creek's growing prosperity, its transformation from struggling outpost to established community. Throughout the meal, Jackson observed Catherine's easy interactions with her neighbors. She belonged here, her natural warmth and intelligence appreciated by people hungry for both. Her Boston refinement, rather than setting her apart, added dimension to the frontier town's evolving character. "You've made a place for yourself," he observed quietly as the meal concluded and people began dispersing toward afternoon activities. Catherine considered his words. "I've found purpose here," she agreed. "These children deserve more than survival skills. They deserve to see the world's possibilities, even if those possibilities take them away from Silver Creek." "Especially then," Catherine replied without hesitation. "What's the point of education if not to expand horizons?" Her conviction reminded Jackson of his father's similar beliefs, that knowledge was meant to free, not constrain. Another unexpected connection between them, another thread binding past to present. As afternoon progressed into evening, Jackson found himself gradually relaxing into the unfamiliar sociability. Daniel disappeared with boys his age, clearly delighted by acceptance into their games. Catherine introduced Jackson to parents and shopkeepers, smoothing awkward moments with practiced ease. When fiddles emerged and dancing began in the cleared street, Jackson retreated to the sidelines, his tolerance for social interaction reaching its limits. Catherine found him leaning against a hitching post, watching townspeople circle in lively patterns. "Not a dancing man, Mr. Cole?" Her use of his formal name carried a teasing lilt. "Not for a long time," he admitted. Catherine stood beside him, close enough that her skirt brushed his boot. "Before the war, before many things, they watched the dancers in companionable silence. Lanterns hung from ropes, stretched between buildings, casting golden light over the celebration. Somewhere, a child laughed, the sound cutting through music, and conversation with innocent joy. "I dreamed of moments like this," Catherine said softly, "in Boston, where every gathering felt like a battlefield of social position. I wanted laughter without agenda, music for joy rather than display." Jackson studied her profile, gilded by lantern light. "And is it what you hoped?" "Better," she replied simply, "because it's real, not imagined." She turned to face him directly. "Will you come to town more often now? The students would benefit from your knowledge of local history, the wildlife." "I don't belong here," Jackson interrupted gently. Catherine's expression grew serious. "Where do you belong, Jackson? Truly?" The question echoed her earlier one. But now, after seeing her in her element, surrounded by a community that valued her gifts, the answer felt different. "I'm still figuring that out," he admitted. Before Catherine could respond, a commotion erupted near the saloon. Raised voices, the crash of breaking glass, then the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. The music stopped abruptly as townspeople scattered, mothers calling children, men moving protectively toward their families. Jackson instinctively pulled Catherine behind him, scanning for the threat. Through the confusion, he glimpsed two men grappling in the street, others attempting to separate them. Mining camp dispute, someone nearby explained. Damn fools brought their grudges to town. The fight escalated as more men joined, alcohol fueling aggression. Jackson watched Mayor Jenkins and the town's deputy attempt to restore order, their efforts ineffective against the growing chaos. "Daniel!" Catherine gasped suddenly. "He was with the Watson boys near the saloon." Jackson's focus narrowed instantly. "Stay here," he ordered, already moving toward the disturbance. The crowd parted before his purposeful stride. At the conflict's edge, Jackson spotted Daniel pinned against the saloon wall by the surge of bodies, the boy's face pale with fear as brawling men careened dangerously close. Without hesitation, Jackson waded into the melee, his size and strength creating a path where none existed. A stray punch glanced off his shoulder, another grazed his jaw. He ignored both, focused solely on reaching Daniel. "Cole!" Dr. Barnes appeared beside him, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "This is getting dangerous!" Together they fought. Through to Daniel, Jackson lifting the boy bodily from harm's way, while Barnes covered their retreat. As they broke free from the crowd, another gunshot cracked across the night, followed by a woman's scream. Jackson turned to find Catherine pushing through onlookers toward them, her face white with terror. "Daniel!" she cried, reaching for the boy. "Are you hurt, boy? Are you hurt, boy?" "I'm all right, ma'am," Daniel assured her, though his voice trembled. "Mr. Cole got me out." Jackson surveyed the escalating situation with combat-honed assessment. The fight had spread, drawing in uninvolved bystanders. Mayor Jenkins lay on the ground, clutching his bleeding arm. The celebration had devolved into frontier brutality, releasing tensions that simmered beneath civilized veneer. "We need to leave," he decided, taking Catherine's elbow. "Now!" "But the wounded," she protested, looking toward where Dr. Barnes was already attending the mayor. "Barnes has help," Jackson countered. "Our horses are at the livery. We move now." "While we can." Catherine hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Lead the way." They skirted the chaos, Jackson keeping Catherine and Daniel close as they hurried toward the livery stable. Behind them, more shots fired, the celebration's collapse complete. The stable boy had fled, leaving the horses untended. Jackson saddled them with efficient haste, while Catherine calmed Daniel, the boy still shaken by his brush with danger. "This changes nothing," Catherine said suddenly. "One incident doesn't define Silver Creek." Jackson tightened a cinch before answering. "Didn't say it did." "You didn't have to." Catherine's perception cut through his silence. "I can see it in your face. Confirmation of why you stay away." "People are unpredictable," Jackson replied, helping Daniel mount. "Dangerous. People are human," Catherine countered, accepting his assistance onto her horse despite her obvious frustration. "Flawed, yes, sometimes violent, but also capable of building schools, of celebrating together, of creating communities." Jackson swung into his saddle, scanning the street before leading them away from town. Not arguing, just stating facts. They rode in tense silence until Silver Creek's lights faded behind them. The night air carried the distant sounds of continued disorder, but the forest's darkness gradually wrapped around them, familiar and insulating. Daniel, recovered from his fright, finally broke the quiet. "Will they be all right? The townspeople?" "Silver Creek has survived worse," Jackson assured him. "By morning they'll be nursing hangovers and regrets." "But their celebration was ruined," the boy persisted. Catherine's voice came softly through the darkness. "Not ruined, Daniel, just interrupted. They'll rebuild, make amends. That's what communities do." Her faith in human resilience, even after witnessing its darker impulses, struck Jackson with uncomfortable force. He'd abandoned such belief years ago, finding safety in isolation, in controlled interaction with a world that had shown him its worst. Yet Catherine, who had experienced her own betrayals, maintained this fundamental optimism, not from naivety, but from choice. As they neared the halfway point to the ranch, Jackson noticed Catherine listing slightly in her saddle, the day's excitement and the hasty departure clearly taxing her still recovering strength. "We'll rest here," he announced, guiding them toward a small clearing beside a creek. "Water the horses." While Daniel tended the animals, Jackson helped Catherine dismount, her exhaustion evident in her uncharacteristic acceptance of his assistance. "I'm sorry," she said once seated on a fallen log. "About today, about you having to rescue Daniel, about everything going wrong." "Nothing went wrong," Jackson corrected her, settling beside her. "People behaved like people. Some good, some bad. Most. Somewhere between." Catherine studied him in the moonlight filtering through bare branches. "You sound almost philosophical, Mr. Cole." "Realistic," he countered. "World's a dangerous place. Recognizing that isn't cynicism. It's survival." But is mere survival enough? Catherine's question hung between them, unanswerable in its simplicity. Jackson looked toward Daniel, who moved with growing confidence as he unsaddled the horses. The boy who had arrived starving at his door now stood taller, stronger, his future no longer measured only in days of survival, but in years of possibility. "It used to be," he admitted finally. Catherine's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers warm against his. "And now?" The question invited truth he wasn't sure he could articulate, that his carefully constructed isolation had been breached not by force, but by compassion, that Catherine Winters, with her quiet strength and stubborn hope, had shown him the emptiness of mere survival. "Now," Jackson began, uncertain how to continue, but before he could find the words, Daniel's alarmed cry split the night. "Riders coming! Fast!" Jackson was on his feet instantly, hand dropping to his revolver. Through the trees, he caught the flicker of approaching torches, heard the thunder of hooves on the forest trail. "Get behind me," he ordered Catherine, drawing. His weapon. "Daniel, bring the horses." Catherine rose to stand beside him instead. "It might be someone from town," she reasoned, "coming to escort us back." But Jackson recognized the sound of pursuit, the intentional pace of men tracking quarry, rather than friendly escorts. "Town didn't know we left," he reminded her grimly. "And they wouldn't come with torches." As if confirming his assessment, a bullet splintered bark near his head, followed by the distant crack of a rifle. "Run!" Jackson commanded, pushing Catherine toward the creek bank. "Both of you! Now! Both of you!" The creek cut a shallow ravine through the forest, its banks offering minimal cover against the approaching riders. Jackson pushed Catherine and Daniel ahead of him, scanning for better shelter as bullets whined through branches overhead. "There," he pointed toward a cluster of fallen timber wedged against the opposite bank. "Move." They splashed across the icy creek, Catherine wincing as the cold water aggravated her healing ankle. Jackson half-carried her up the slippery bank, his focus divided between their escape and the approaching threat. "Who are they?" Daniel gasped, crouching behind the log barricade. "Mining camp troublemakers," Jackson guessed, counting at least 4 torches moving through the trees. "Probably didn't appreciate town folks trying to stop their fun." Catherine's face was pale in the moonlight, but her voice remained steady. "Why follow us? We weren't involved." "Drunk men don't need reasons," Jackson replied grimly, checking his revolver. 6 shots. Not enough if they were outnumbered. "They saw us leave. Easy targets." The riders slowed at the creek, torchlight reflecting off the water as they searched for tracks. Jackson counted 6 men, most visibly armed, all showing signs of the brawl, torn clothing, bloodied faces. "Think they ran this way?" one called, his voice slurred. "Saw 'em headed toward the creek," another answered. "The schoolmarm and that scarred fella who butted in?" Jackson's jaw tightened. Not random pursuit then, deliberate targeting. "What do we do?" Daniel whispered, fear sharpening his young features. "Stay hidden," Jackson instructed. "If shooting starts, both of you keep low and work your way upstream. Don't stop until you reach the ranch." Catherine's hand gripped his arm. "We're not leaving you." "Not discussing this," Jackson replied, the familiar cold focus of combat settling over him. "Daniel, get you home safe. That's the priority." Before she could argue further, one of the men spotted their horses, still visible through the trees where Daniel had secured them. "Found their mounts!" he shouted. "They can't be far!" Jackson made a swift decision. "Change of plans. Daniel, when I create a distraction, you and Catherine mount up and ride hard for the ranch. Don't look back." "What distraction?" Catherine demanded. Instead of answering, Jackson removed his distinctive hat and coat, placing them behind the log. "Stay here until you hear shooting, then run for the horses." "Jackson," Catherine began, but he was already moving, slipping silently along the creek bank, using shadows and vegetation for cover. The men had dismounted, 2 holding torches, while others fanned out along the creek. Jackson circled behind them, choosing his position carefully. He needed to draw them away from Catherine and Daniel's escape route, create enough confusion for their safe retreat. A fallen branch provided the opportunity. Jackson hefted it, took aim at the farthest torch-bearer, and threw with calculated force. The branch struck true, knocking the man sideways and extinguishing his torch in the creek with a hiss of steam. "What the hell?" The man staggered, cursing. As his companions turned toward the disturbance, Jackson moved quickly to a new position, picked up a fist-sized rock, and hurled it in the opposite direction. It crashed through undergrowth, drawing more attention. "Someone's there!" A rifle shot cracked through the night, fired blindly toward the noise. While the men focused on phantom threats, Jackson positioned himself for the final distraction. Drawing his revolver, he fired 2 shots into the air, well away from his actual location. The response was immediate, men diving for cover, returning fire toward his decoy shots. In the chaos, Jackson spotted Daniel and Catherine breaking from their hiding place, running low toward the horses. The plan worked until Catherine's injured ankle betrayed her. Her stumble was slight, but enough to catch torchlight as she fell. One of the men shouted, pointing toward the fleeing pair. Jackson didn't hesitate. Rising from cover, he fired deliberately at the men's feet, forcing them to scatter. "Run!" he shouted to Catherine and Daniel, abandoning stealth for direct intervention. A bullet whined past his ear as he charged forward, firing again to keep the attackers pinned down. He reached Catherine as Daniel helped her to her feet, her face tight with pain. "Can you ride?" Jackson demanded, supporting her weight. "Yes," she gasped, determination overriding discomfort. They half ran toward the horses, bullets splintering trees around them. Daniel reached his mount first, swinging up with practiced ease. Jackson boosted Catherine onto her horse, then turned to face the approaching men, revolver ready. "Go!" he commanded. "I'll hold them off." "Not without you," Catherine refused, gathering her reins. "Damn it, woman!" Jackson began, but movement in his peripheral vision forced his attention back to their pursuers. 2 men had circled around, cutting off their escape route. Others advanced from the creek. They were surrounded. Jackson's combat-trained mind calculated odds, discarded options, settled on the only viable strategy. "Stay behind me," he ordered, positioning himself between Catherine and the closest threat. The leader of the group stepped forward, torch illuminating a face Jackson recognized from Silver Creek's saloon, a burly miner with a week's growth of beard and cold, calculating eyes. "Well now," the man drawled, rifle held casually across his chest. "Looks like we caught ourselves the fancy schoolteacher and her mountain man protector." "You're making a mistake," Jackson replied evenly. "We had nothing to do with the fight. In town, see, that's where you're wrong," the miner countered. "Your schoolmom here is the reason the whole town went soft. Used to be a man, could enjoy himself without interference. Now it's all civilization and proper behavior." He spat into the dirt. "Women don't belong out here changing things." The complaint revealed more than simple drunken aggression. These were men threatened by Silver Creek's evolution, by the community Catherine represented. Progress had made them obsolete, and alcohol had transformed resentment into violence. "You've had your fun," Jackson said, voice deliberately calm. "Go back to your camp, no harm done." The leader laughed, an ugly sound echoed by his companions. "Oh, we intend to have some real fun now." His gaze shifted to Catherine, its meaning unmistakable. Jackson heard Daniel's sharp intake of breath, felt Catherine stiffen behind him. "That won't happen," he stated, each word carved from granite. 6. "Of us, one of you," the miner calculated. "Those odds favor us considerably." "Check your math," Jackson replied. 2 shots fired as distraction, 4 bullets remaining. Not enough. "I count 3 of you still standing after I'm done." The threat gave the men pause. In their hesitation, Jackson saw an unexpected advantage. They weren't hardened killers, just angry, drunk men who'd let mob mentality carry them too far. "Here's what's going to happen," Jackson continued, using their uncertainty. "My companions are leaving. You're going to let them pass." He deliberately stepped away from Catherine and Daniel. "I'll remain. Any grievance you have, it's with me." "Jackson." "No," Catherine protested. He silenced her with a glance, his decision made. "Daniel, take Miss Winters home." The boy looked torn between obedience and loyalty, his young face a study in conflict. "Bold play," the miner leader commented, his earlier bravado diminishing as sobriety began asserting itself. "What's to stop? Us taking all 3? "I am," Jackson answered simply. To demonstrate, he abruptly raised his revolver and fired, the bullet clipping the leader's hat brim. The man stumbled back, shock replacing arrogance. "Next one won't miss," Jackson promised. "Catherine, Daniel, ride, now." Something in his voice, perhaps the use of her first name, perhaps the unmistakable command, moved Catherine to action. She wheeled her horse, Daniel following suit. "After them!" one of the miners yelled, raising his rifle. Jackson's next shot knocked the weapon from the man's hands. "Your quarrel is with me," he reminded them, stepping forward to become the focus of their attention. "Let them go." The leader, recovering his composure, assessed the changing situation. His men were sobering rapidly, the excitement of pursuit giving way to recognition of potential consequences. "Let them go," he decided finally. "This one's trouble enough." Jackson watched peripherally as Catherine and Daniel disappeared into the darkness, the sound of hoofbeats fading. Only when certain of their escape did he allow himself to acknowledge his precarious position, alone, outnumbered, with only 2 bullets remaining. The miners circled slowly, confidence returning as they realized their advantage. Jackson stood, motionless at the center, revolver lowered but ready, mind calculating possibilities that dwindled with each passing second. "Not so threatening now, are you?" the leader taunted, nursing his injured hand. "Brave sacrifice, though. Man protecting. His woman. Just preventing you from making a mistake you'd regret sober," Jackson countered. A younger miner stepped forward, rifle aimed at Jackson's chest. "Killing you wouldn't be no mistake. You interfered in our business. Bullying townsfolk and chasing women is business now?" Jackson infused his voice with contempt, a deliberate provocation. If violence was inevitable, better to control its timing. The leader raised his hand, halting his companion's reaction. "Hold on, Jed. Something familiar. About this one." He squinted through the torchlight. "That scar. I've seen you before, not just in town." Jackson remained still, revealing nothing. "Wait," another miner exclaimed. "I know him. That's the Prairie Shadow, from the war." The name hit Jackson like a physical blow. He'd not heard it, spoken aloud in years, had believed, hoped it forgotten. But frontier memories ran long, and legends traveled with whispering persistence through mining camps and cattle towns. The miners' postures changed immediately, wariness replacing bravado. The Prairie Shadow, Union scout, who moved unseen behind enemy lines, who single-handedly captured a Confederate colonel, who survived Antietam's slaughter only to vanish when peace came. "That true?" the leader demanded, newfound respect mingling with suspicion. You that scout from Tennessee?" Jackson neither confirmed nor denied, but his silence was answer enough. "Hell," one miner whispered. "My brother served with Burnside, said the shadow could kill a man at 100 yards in darkness. Exaggeration, myth-making, the distortion of deeds born from men's need for heroes and demons alike. Jackson had been neither, just a soldier with particular skills and terrible luck. If I am," he said finally, "then you understand the situation better." The leader's expression shifted through calculation to decision. "Boys, I'm thinking we made an error in judgment." He lowered his weapon. "No harm intended, mister, just liquor talking." Just like that, threat dissolving into backslapping camaraderie, violence averted by invocation of reputation, by the ghosts of deeds long past. Jackson felt hollowed by the transformation, by the ease with which men's nature pivoted between cruelty and deference. "Go back to your camp," he ordered quietly. "Stay away from Silver Creek unless you're bringing honest business." They complied with surprising readiness, mounting their horses with murmured apologies and backward glances. The leader paused before departing. "No hard feelings," he offered awkwardly. "Didn't recognize you earlier." Jackson said nothing, watching until their torches vanished into night's embrace. Only then did he holster his revolver, the metal cold, against his palm, and begin the long walk home. The journey stretched before him, miles of forest trail illuminated only by stars and scattered moonlight. His horses gone with Catherine and Daniel, Jackson set a steady pace, his thoughts darker than the shadows surrounding him. The prairie shadow. The name he'd shed with his uniform, buried beneath years of solitude. Yet it lingered, following him. Like curse or blessing, he'd never decided which. Tonight it had saved lives, perhaps, but its resurrection opened wounds he'd believed long healed. Dawn tinged the horizon when Jackson finally crested the ridge overlooking his ranch. The cabin stood silhouetted against lightening sky, smoke curling from the chimney, evidence that Catherine and Daniel had arrived safely. Relief softened his exhaustion as he descended the slope toward home. They must have spotted his approach. The door flew open as he reached the yard, Catherine rushing out despite her injured ankle, Daniel close behind. Their faces showed mirror images of worry transformed to relief. "Jackson!" "Catherine." "Jackson!" Catherine reached him first, her hands grasping his arms as if to verify his solidity. "We thought—" Words failed her, emotion rendering her uncharacteristically speechless. "You're alive," Daniel stated, relief washing years from his young face. "We heard shots." "Just warnings," Jackson assured them, suddenly aware of his bone-deep exhaustion. The night's events, the long walk home, and Catherine's evident concern conspired to strip away his careful defenses. "Come inside," Catherine urged, supporting him despite her own injury. "You're dead on your feet." The cabin's warmth enveloped him, familiar yet somehow altered. Coffee bubbled on the stove, its aroma a welcome beacon. Daniel hurried to pour a cup while Catherine guided Jackson to a chair. "They let you go," she observed, studying his face for explanation. "Why?" Jackson sipped the coffee, buying time to decide how much to reveal. They sobered up, realized the trouble they'd be in. Catherine's eyes narrowed, her perception cutting through his evasion. "No. Something else happened. They were determined. Violent. Something changed their minds." "They recognized him," Daniel supplied, his expression somewhere between awe and confusion. "I heard them before we rode away. Called him the Prairie Shadow." Catherine's breath caught, recognition flickering across her face. "The scout from the Tennessee campaign? The one who—" She stopped, studying Jackson with new understanding. "That was you." "Long time ago," Jackson dismissed, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "Different man." "Not so different," Catherine countered softly. She knelt before him, wincing slightly as her injured ankle protested. "The same man who risked himself for others, who put our safety above his own." Jackson looked away, unable to face the admiration in her eyes. Did what needed doing. You gave yourself up to save us. Daniel's voice held no question, only certainty. Thought they were going to kill you. Wouldn't be my first close call. Jackson attempted lightness, but the boy's solemnity demanded honesty. Yes, I thought that too. Catherine's hand found his, her fingers threading through his calloused ones with surprising strength. Thank you isn't adequate, but thank you. The simple sincerity in her voice broke something loose within Jackson. Damn holding back emotions he'd refused to name. Exhaustion stripped away pretense, leaving only essential truth. Couldn't let them hurt you, he said, meeting her gaze directly. Either of you. The admission hung in the air, unadorned by qualification or deflection. Catherine's eyes widened slightly, recognizing the significance of his directness. The Prairie Shadow, she mused, testing the name. It suits you in its way, moving unseen, watching over others, present but apart. Legends mostly lies, Jackson corrected, like all war stories. Perhaps, Catherine acknowledged, but legends grow from seeds of truth, and your actions tonight speak volumes about the man behind the name. Daniel, sensing the conversation's intensity, busied himself preparing food. Jackson watched the boy move confidently around the cabin that had once been solely his domain, now transformed by their shared presence. You rode well, he told Daniel, offering deserved praise. Got her home safe. The boy straightened, pride visible in his posture. Did what you taught me, kept to the trees, avoided the main trail. Good man, Jackson approved, the words emerging naturally despite their weight. Catherine's smile at this exchange held a depth of emotion Jackson couldn't fully decipher. You've given him more than shelter, she observed quietly. You've given him example, purpose. Before Jackson could respond, exhaustion claimed him completely. He slumped in the chair, the night's exertions finally overwhelming his stamina. Bed, Catherine ordered, maternal authority brooking no argument. You've walked miles after facing down armed men. Sleep is non-negotiable. Too tired to resist, Jackson allowed himself to be guided to his bed. The bed Catherine had occupied, during her recovery, now returned to its original purpose. As consciousness faded, he was vaguely aware of her removing his boots, of a blanket being drawn over him, of her hand briefly touching his brow in a gesture that might have been blessing or caress. He slept deeply, dreamlessly, awakening to afternoon light filtering through the cabin windows. For a moment, disorientation gripped him. Sleeping during daylight hours represented vulnerability he rarely permitted himself. The cabin stood empty, but sounds from outside drew him to the window. Catherine sat on the porch, wrapped in a quilt. Against the lingering chill, reading aloud from her book of Whitman, Daniel sat at her feet, whittling a piece of pine while absorbing her words. The tableau struck Jackson with unexpected force, its simple domesticity, its rightness. For weeks, he'd anticipated Catherine's departure with resignation, accepting the inevitable return to isolation as proper restoration of his chosen existence. Now, watching her animated face as she read, seeing Daniel's concentration as he listened. While working with his hands, Jackson confronted the truth he'd been avoiding. He didn't want them to leave, didn't want to return to silence and solitude, didn't want to lose this unexpected family that circumstance had delivered to his door. The realization came without drama or revelation, merely quiet certainty, like recognizing a path previously obscured by underbrush. Jackson had been walking toward this moment since pulling Catherine from the snow, perhaps since before that, since choosing this remote cabin, this isolated existence that had seemed like protection, but proved instead a different kind of prison. He dressed and joined them outside, his appearance causing Catherine to pause mid-verse. "You've slept the day away," she observed, relief evident in her smile. "Feeling restored?" Getting there, Jackson settled on the porch step, accepting the coffee Daniel hurried to fetch. "Any sign of trouble?" Catherine shook her head. "Peaceful, as Eden before the fall." The biblical reference wouldn't have occurred to Jackson, but it suited the moment, this precious interlude between danger past and decisions future. He sipped his coffee, allowing the quiet companionship to settle around him like a familiar coat. "What happens now?" Daniel asked eventually, the question hanging unanswered since their return. Jackson glanced at Catherine, finding her gaze already on him, patient yet expectant. "We should talk about that," he agreed, directing his words primarily to her. Daniel, perceptive beyond his years, rose immediately. "I'll check the livestock," he offered, disappearing toward the barn with deliberate speed that brought a smile to Catherine's lips. "Subtle, isn't he?" she remarked, watching the boys retreat. "Smarter than most grown men I've known," Jackson agreed. He set aside his coffee cup, searching for words adequate to the moment. "Last night changed things." Catherine nodded slowly. "Yes. Made me see what I've been avoiding." Jackson looked out across his land, the mountains rising beyond the meadow, the forest protecting his boundaries, the ranch he'd built as refuge from a world that had taken too much from him. "I thought isolation was safety, thought being alone meant being free." "And now?" Catherine prompted gently when he fell silent. "Now I understand what my father tried to teach me before he died." Jackson turned to face her directly. "That a man needs purpose beyond survival. Needs connection to remind him why survival matters." Catherine's eyes widened slightly, hope cautiously entering her expression. "What are you saying, Jackson?" "I'm saying Daniel needs someone to show him how to become a good man." The words came easier now, flowing from certainty rather than struggle. "I'm saying this ranch is too much for one person. I'm saying—" He paused, gathering courage for plain speaking. "I'm saying I don't want you to leave. Either of you." Color rose in Catherine's cheeks, but her gaze remained steady. "Silver Creek needs its teacher," she reminded him softly. "Silver Creek can have its teacher," Jackson acknowledged. 4 days a week. The rest of the time she could have a home. Here. The proposal, imperfectly articulated yet unmistakable in intent, hung between them. Catherine's hands stilled on her book, her expression unreadable. "Are you asking me to stay as your housekeeper, Jackson, or as something else?" Her directness demanded equal clarity. "As my wife," he answered simply, "if you'd consider such an arrangement." "An arrangement," Catherine repeated, a smile tugging at her lips despite her obvious attempt at sobriety. "How pragmatic!" Jackson recognized his misstep immediately. "Not just pragmatic," he corrected, reaching for her hand, "though God knows I'm better with actions than words." "Then show me," Catherine challenged softly. Jackson hesitated only briefly before leaning forward to press his lips against hers, tentatively at first, then with growing certainty as she responded. The kiss contained everything he struggled to express: gratitude for her presence in his life, admiration for her courage, hope for a future neither had anticipated. When they separated, Catherine's eyes remained closed momentarily, as if preserving the sensation. When she looked at him, again, her smile held both tenderness and mischief. "That was considerably more eloquent than an arrangement," she observed. Jackson felt an answering smile tug at his mouth, the expression still unfamiliar after years of disuse. "I'm a quick study when properly motivated." Catherine's laugh brightened. The afternoon, drawing Daniel's curious face around the barn door. She gestured him over, her decision evident in the gesture. "I believe," she said as the boy approached, "that we've been offered permanent residence." Daniel's expression cycled rapidly through disbelief to hope. "Both of us?" "Both of you," Jackson confirmed. "If you're willing." "As what?" the practical boy demanded, reminding Jackson of his own direct nature. I mean, what would Miss Winters be? Your housekeeper? My wife, Jackson corrected, the word emerging more confidently this time. Daniel's face split into a grin of pure joy. About time, he declared with youthful candor. Been watching you two circle each other for weeks. Catherine laughed again, the sound transforming the air around them. Out of the mouths of babes, she remarked, squeezing Jackson's hand, though I don't recall hearing an actual acceptance of your proposal, Mr. Cole. Consider this my acceptance, she added before he could respond, leaning forward to initiate another kiss that left no doubt about her decision. Spring arrived in earnest the following week, the last snow melting from south-facing slopes, creeks, swelling with runoff, first tentative wildflowers appearing in sheltered meadows. Jackson expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom for Daniel, and extending the main room to accommodate Catherine's books and teaching materials. Silver Creek adjusted to the arrangement with surprising ease. The schoolmarm living at the reclusive rancher's property raised eyebrows initially, but their marriage, performed by the circuit preacher during his monthly visit, quieted most gossip. Catherine's dedication to her students, riding into town 4 days weekly, regardless of weather, earned community respect that extended to her unconventional husband. Life settled into rhythms both familiar and new. Jackson and Daniel worked the ranch together, the boy growing in confidence and skill under patient tutelage. Catherine divided her time between schoolhouse and home, bringing town news and student achievements to their supper table, carrying books and ideas between her dual worlds. On an unusually warm April afternoon, Jackson paused in fence repair to watch Catherine's return. She rode with growing confidence, her injured ankle fully healed, her posture straight despite the day's teaching behind her. Daniel raced out to meet her, his excited voice carrying across the meadow as he shared some discovery made during her absence. Jackson leaned on his fence post, allowing himself the luxury of simple observation. The woman who had nearly died, in the blizzard, now moved through the world with renewed purpose. The boy who had arrived starving at his door now stood tall and strong, and Jackson himself, the man who had believed solitude his only refuge, now found strength in connection rather than isolation. Your wool gathering, Mr. Cole, Catherine observed as she reached him, dismounting with practiced ease. Not like you to pause mid-task. Some sights warrant pausing, he replied, drawing her close, despite Daniel's theatrical groan. Later that evening, with Daniel asleep and night sounds creating familiar symphony outside their window, Catherine, who curled against Jackson's side, her head resting on his shoulder. Happy? He asked, the words still new enough to require confirmation. Completely, she assured him, her fingers tracing the scar that no longer defined him. Strange how life's worst moments can lead to its best, isn't it? If the stagecoach hadn't overturned, if you hadn't found me in that blizzard. If, Jackson agreed, understanding her meaning perfectly. Life's path determined by seemingly random moments, a broken ankle, a winter storm, a chance discovery. But it did, and I did. And here we are, Catherine concluded, satisfaction warming her voice. The school teacher who fled Boston society, the soldier who retreated from the world, and the orphaned boy who connected us both. Quite the unlikely family. Family, Jackson repeated, savoring the word that had once belonged only to memory. Yes, that's what we are. Outside, spring wind whispered through pine boughs, carrying promise rather than threat. Inside, surrounded by the home they'd created together, the prairie shadow finally stepped fully into light, leaving isolation's shadows behind for the brighter landscape of shared lives and intertwined futures. Up next, you've got two more standout Stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. 5 years later, the Silver Creek schoolhouse buzzed with anticipation, benches arranged in neat rows before a makeshift stage constructed for the end-of-term exhibition. Parents and townspeople filled every available space, craning necks for better views as Mayor Jenkins signaled for quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, chest puffed with civic pride, "I present Silver Creek's graduating class of 1878 under the distinguished guidance of our beloved teacher, Mrs. Catherine Cole." Applause filled the room as Catherine stepped forward, her simple blue dress adorned only by a silver brooch, Jackson's gift on their 4th anniversary. At 30, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who had found her place in the world, her purpose realized daily in the bright faces before her. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly to the room's corners. "Today we celebrate not just academic achievement, but the spirit that drives us all to reach beyond what we know toward what we might become." From his position at the back wall, Jackson watched his wife with undisguised admiration. 5 years of marriage had only deepened his appreciation for her strength, her intelligence, her uncompromising belief in human potential. Beside him stood Daniel, now 18, tall and broad-shouldered. His boyish features matured into a young man's steadiness. No longer the half-starved orphan who had stumbled onto their homestead, Daniel Cole, officially adopted 3 years earlier, had grown into his place as son, ranch hand, and brother. For nestled in Daniel's arms was 3-year-old Sarah Cole, her dark curls and serious expression unmistakably her father's, though her green eyes mirrored her mother's. The child watched the proceedings with precocious intensity, occasionally whispering questions that Daniel answered with patient thoroughness. 5 years ago, Catherine continued, her gaze finding Jackson's across the crowded room. Silver Creek consisted of a saloon, a general store, and a handful of determined souls. Today we have a proper church, a doctor's office, and most importantly, a school where children learn not just reading and arithmetic, but the value of community and the power of knowledge. Jackson shifted slightly, still uncomfortable with crowds. Despite years of gradual reintegration into town life, the attention his family drew, the respected teacher, the reformed recluse, their adopted son and precocious daughter, remained a source of mild discomfort, though he'd learned to tolerate. Yet for Catherine's sake, our graduates have prepared special presentations demonstrating their learning, Catherine announced, beginning with Timothy Jenkins, who will share his research on the historical significance of the Transcontinental Railroad. The mayor's son stepped forward, nervous but prepared, launching into an articulate explanation of how rail travel had transformed the Western Territories. Jackson listened with particular interest, having contributed first-hand accounts of the railroad's construction to the boys' research. As the presentations continued, Jackson reflected on the transformation of his own life. From isolated survivor to husband, father, community member, the ranch had prospered under his and Daniel's care, expanding to include a small apple orchard planted at Catherine's suggestion. Their home had grown as well. The original cabin now augmented by proper bedrooms, a study filled with books, and a wide porch where the family gathered on summer evenings. Most significant was the transformation within himself. The hypervigilance of his post-war years had gradually eased, replaced by measured caution rather than constant suspicion. The nightmares came less frequently now, and when they did, Catherine's presence beside him provided anchor against memory's darker currents. Little Sarah squirmed in Daniel's arms, finally breaking free to toddle determinedly toward her father. Jackson scooped her up automatically, settling her against his chest, where she tucked her head beneath his chin with practiced familiarity. "Papa watch Mama," she whispered conspiratorially, patting his scarred cheek with perfect acceptance. "Yes, sweetheart," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her curls. "Papa watches Mama." The exhibition concluded with a musical performance, students singing the newly composed state anthem with varying degrees of pitch accuracy. As the audience rose in appreciative applause, Jackson caught Dr. Barnes watching him from across the room, the physician's knowing smile, acknowledging the distance traveled from that snowy night when a half-frozen schoolteacher had changed everything. Afterward, as families mingled and congratulated the graduates, Catherine made her way to Jackson's side, accepting little Sarah's enthusiastic embrace. "Another successful term," he commented, genuine pride warming his voice. "Town's lucky to have you." "I'm the fortunate one," Catherine countered, her hand finding his. "How many teachers have the opportunity to shape a community from its foundations?" "Mayor." Jenkins approached, beaming with satisfaction. "Mrs. Cole, exceptional presentations. The school board's annual report will reflect our highest commendation." "The students deserve the credit," Catherine replied graciously. "Their hard work makes my job a joy." "Nevertheless," the mayor persisted, "we recognize the extraordinary dedication you bring to your position, which is why—" He glanced at his wife, who nodded encouragement. "We've decided to offer you the principalship of the new regional academy being built in Carson City." Catherine's surprise registered clearly. "I wasn't aware plans had progressed so far." "The territorial governor approved funding last month," Jenkins explained. "Construction begins this summer, doors open next spring. They're seeking experienced educators with vision." His chest swelled importantly. "I took the liberty of recommending you most highly." Jackson felt Catherine's hand tighten in his, sensing the conflicting emotions the offer provoked. A principalship represented professional advancement, recognition of her abilities beyond their small community. Carson City offered cultural opportunities, access to libraries and lectures, connections to the wider educational world. "I'm deeply honored," Catherine began carefully, "but such a position would require relocation. My family, our ranch—" Of course, Jenkins hastened to add. "It's not a decision to make lightly. The Academy Committee understands this. They've asked only that you consider the opportunity and visit Carson City this summer to discuss possibilities." After the mayor departed, Catherine remained thoughtfully silent as they gathered their belongings and prepared for the journey home. Daniel drove the wagon with Sarah beside him, the little girl chattering happily about the day's excitement, while Jackson and Catherine rode horseback alongside. "You're considering it," Jackson observed, as they crested the ridge overlooking their valley. Catherine glanced at him, surprise evident. "You're not upset by the prospect?" "Would have been once," he admitted. "Change was threatening. And now?" Catherine's question contained no pressure, merely honest inquiry. Jackson considered before answering, his gaze taking in the ranch below, the expanded cabin, the fenced pastures, the orchard's neat rows. "Now I understand that some things remain constant regardless of location." Catherine's expression softened with recognition of his meaning. "You've come a long way from the man who couldn't bear the thought of town dinner." "Had proper motivation," he replied, the understated response carrying deeper meaning between them. That evening, after Sarah's bedtime stories and Daniel's departure to visit friends in town, Jackson and Catherine sat on their porch, watching twilight settle across the valley. The familiar ritual had become precious to them both, this quiet time to share, thoughts uninterrupted to simply exist together in comfortable silence. Carson City would offer Sarah educational opportunities Silver Creek can't provide, Catherine observed, continuing their earlier conversation. And Daniel could attend the territorial college. Jackson nodded, acknowledging the truth in her. Assessment. Ranch could be sold, or Daniel could manage it if he chooses. But this is your home, Catherine countered gently. The place you built, where you found peace. Jackson turned to face her directly, needing her to understand what had taken him years to recognize himself. You misunderstand. This, he gestured to the buildings, the land, isn't what saved me. You did. Daniel did. Sarah did. Home isn't the place, Catherine. It's the people. Catherine's eyes brightened with unshed tears. When did the stoic Jackson Cole become so eloquent? Learned from my wife, he replied, drawing her closer. School teacher has that effect. They sat together as stars emerged, the decision not yet made, but no longer fraught with impossibility. Whatever path they chose, remaining at the ranch or building new lives in Carson City, would be navigated together, their family intact, their connection unbroken by mere geography. Later, as they prepared for bed, Jackson watched Catherine brush her hair by lamplight, the familiar ritual still fascinating after 5 years of marriage. She caught his reflection in the mirror. Her smile acknowledging his attention. Happy? He asked, the question that had become their private benediction. Completely, she affirmed, setting down her brush to join him. You? Jackson drew her close, breathing in the lavender scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her presence. More than I believed possible, he admitted. More than I deserved. Love isn't about deserving, Catherine reminded him, her hand resting over his heart. It's about recognizing what truly matters and holding fast through whatever comes. Outside, the Montana night enfolded their home in star-dusted darkness. Inside, surrounded by the life they'd built together, Jackson Cole, once the solitary prairie shadow, embraced the light that had found him in winter's darkest hour, grateful beyond words for the storm that had brought Catherine to his door and the courage that had allowed him to open it.